Hi, welcome back to Dad's Planning Politics. Hi, Freddie.
Welcome back. Hi, Dada. Nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a little while because you've been over in America, which I know that you want to discuss a lot in today's episode.
Yes, a little bit. We'll go through a few observations I have of the US, having been in LA for the last 5 days or so. We're then going to talk about Trump's big, beautiful bill passing both houses, a potential Gaza ceasefire that's in the offing, which would be good. Anti-Semitism rises again in Australia, some attacks last Friday night in Melbourne. And lastly, Netanyahu is in the US as we speak, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, just in
And
the
the
last
potential
day
for
or
a
so,
ceasefire.
yes, day or so, the results of the court case that's been occupying the attention of the world, the death
The
cap
world,
mushroom. No, I think there's a
Australia.
lot of global coverage, actually. It's very interesting. There was coverage in the US here of the woman who killed her family, so with the mushrooms, the mushroom woman.
The mushroom woman. Oh my God. I don't think you know half as much about this case as most of Australia does. I
I
think we
think I
should have
know.
my mum on here. Her obsession with this case has been somewhat shocking to all of us. Suddenly, her
So,
eyes are glued to the news instead of scrolling through her reels.
so let's start with the big, beautiful bill. Got through just with a few Republicans abstaining,
I'm fairly
etc.
sure it just got through with Vance's tie-breaking vote
Yeah.
as vice
Um,
president.
but
It's
this is
not
rather.
getting rid of Medicaid, it's just like that's not really factually correct. It's just increasing the requirements for Medicaid.
Required.
So, limiting it to most people and only for more extreme cases.
So it's going to be fascinating from a political point of view because many of the people who voted for Trump, the MAGA working class, they're going to be really impacted by
Well,
this.
MAGA is something different, I think, to most of the people who voted for Trump. I do have to say that. MAGA is his, incredibly strong foundational supporters. Most of the people who voted for him are not necessarily, essentially
But they
MAGA. I
like to
don't think
think of themselves
50%
as,
of Americans are MAGA, you
but they
know?
might like to think of themselves as MAGA. It'd be interesting to see what percentage think of themselves as that.
But
Anyway,
I think it's one thing to say "Make America Great Again" or another thing to identify as a MAGA
people who voted
member.
for Trump, many of which are going to be horrified by this. So it'll be interesting how this plays out um, over time. But of course, people who are very wealthy are going to be getting a big tax cut. The US deficit is going to balloon. So it doesn't make any economic sense overall. But it'll be fascinating to see what happens. And he's got it through.
I mean, yeah, no, it's a really sad day, I would say, for most Americans. It must be a really difficult place to be, especially with this. There's so much cultural tension between the two sides of American politics, and that culture war has really become such a thing that people are so driven by hatred towards each other. But this bill isn't just targeting one section of the population; it's targeting everyone. And when something bypasses race, ethnicity, and like your in group like that, it just attacks people of certain classes, really. And all classes of people voted for Trump, all economic classes. So yeah, I think it's really gonna say something to people who have been arguing, since the day that he stepped into office, that it's gonna have a good effect on their lives economically, when their health costs, which are already skyrocketed, go up even further than they already are. And they feel lost and without hope, and they feel isolated. It's this feeling of individualism, right, which the community is being torn apart.
Yep, so it's true. But the rationale of this initiative is that it will spur innovation because people have more incentive, etc., etc. The trickle down
The
effect.
rationale is that they want to reduce costs. That's the marketing statement that they put out at the
No, but
press
the
club.
rationale is they think this will boost the economy, etc. Which has been tried before.
How
And I
would it
think
boost the economy?
the trickle down effect that people
How? Explain it to
who
me.
have
No, I'm
their
interested.
their tax income reduced, they'll have more spending power, and wealthy who have their taxes reduced will typically spend that money and
So
boost
what
the.
percentage of the people is this going to affect who are going to have more money? What percentage of Americans?
What percentage will have more money?
Yeah.
Oh, the
What
top
percentage of the ones?
10%.
The top, I think less than that, probably the top 2%, yeah, I would
No, I
say.
think it's
So,
actually typically the top 10% in this scenario.
all right, okay, the top 10%. Yay, 10% of the population have more capacity for innovation. Woo, congrats, that's great. Let's take away those opportunities from everyone else.
Well, look,
Because
don't get
economics
Freddie.
does
Come on,
say,
don't you try and claim against this as your thing. I'm not for this. I'm just explaining what the scenario is, right?
I know,
Don't try
I
and
know.
claim that ground. I mean, I've been here for the last week, and it's horrific. The difference between
I
working
know that you don't
or
want
here.
this for people. I understand that. I just think it's interesting that your first point of call when you start talking about it is how it's going to spark innovation. And I think some part of you, even though it's a horrific thing to have happened and you would never put through a bill like this, some part of you does think it will spur
I
innovation.
was just saying, what is their rationale for doing it, and that is the stated
But
rationale.
I think, yeah, that's their rationale to convince people that it's a good idea. But I think if you really get down to the crux of it, what are they trying to do? They're just trying to cut everything because, like, this is how you break down a democracy. You slowly, bit by bit, remove all of this infrastructure that supports people, and they're centralizing all the power back to the White House. So they're taking a lot of power away from the states. But what's interesting about this big beautiful bill is actually it's because it's going to be less of a federally supported health system. It means that some of the states may feel a responsibility to be paying for healthcare for their citizens. And it's interesting to see how that will have an effect as well on their budgets. Because I've heard some states may sacrifice money on education and sacrifice money on like other forms of welfare in order to provide healthcare for
Well,
their
it's an interesting
citizens.
point. Part of the bill is they're going to give some extra funding to regional hospitals, etc. Because what happens in America with this cutting of Medicaid or raising the barriers on it, people end up just in emergency. A friend of mine's wife is in emergency medicine and worked in San Francisco. And when the BART stops running, they're inundated with homeless people in the emergency department of this hospital every night at 10:30, 11 p.m. And they sort of have to treat them for at least a day or so, right? Because it's a Hippocratic oath.
Yeah,
But then they get sent back to the street the next day. It's just a crazy,
yeah.
chaotic.
It's just removing all the proper systems. So it's just making it far more difficult even to do the proper job of healthcare. And I found it really interesting. I know we don't want to go into tariffs that much, but to do with this, did you see this? This came up on my in my reading over the past few days that some big American lobby groups have started targeting Australia and Australian medicine that we
Mhm.
use and have said that we need to have a much they need to have a much higher tariff for Australian goods because we are providing almost too much of a subsidy for medicine and that our medicine is too cheap, and so they think that that's not fair and it's undervaluing the American made vaccines and
Oh,
medicine. It's not
Freddie, that's.
valuing it properly.
I'm glad you've covered that because that's the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, and the Australian scenario is that we buy in bulk. So we've negotiated really good prices
Mhm.
for this, and so we do subsidise medicine. And of course, the American pharmaceutical companies hate this because they've got one big purchaser in Australia, and nobody else can sell stuff to Australia in this regard. Just hold on, Freddie. Hi everyone. Sorry, we had to just pause for a minute because I'm in Los Angeles with my younger daughter, and I love mint tea, right? So I bought mint tea bags from Australia, and somehow I've run out and lost them. So I called up to ask for 2 tea bags to be set up, and of course they sent up the mint tea already made, and then it was going to cost $20 for
20 American dollars
American dollars
for two
for a cup
cups
of
of
tea.
mint tea,
So
which
I
is
said,
essentially
that's not
just
what I
some
asked.
leaves and hot water.
We sent it back and such. So anyway, that was the interruption. And I have to say, my goodness, we thought there was inflation in Australia. The cost of living here is astounding. The cost of going out and eating and everything, it makes Sydney and Australia seem cheap by comparison. And it just shows you what the challenge is for the average everyday American, right? Because the cost of living here is astounding.
Yeah, no, exactly. I completely agree. And it's interesting then how the cost of living being astounding has turned these lobby groups to not trying to fix the problem in America, but simply trying to cause the problem in other countries by, you would think your immediate reaction to high medicine prices would be to say, how can we reduce the price in America? but instead they're just looking around the world, trying to target those countries who do have good healthcare systems and do have good subsidies for medicine, as there should be. We should be having subsidies, and people should be able to get basic medicine affordably. And it's what a wild suggestion to say that they can dictate the price of whatever's in our country, even if they're not necessarily the ones exporting it all to us.
But you see, they're not used to a scenario where there's one buyer, the Australian government, one buyer, the UK government. So for all the medicine in the UK or all the medicine in Australia, there's one buyer. And unless you abide by this price, you're not going to sell anything in Australia. And they hate it, right? Because that's market power, which is
Yeah,
really smart on
definitely.
behalf of the Australian government and the UK government in those examples.
Yeah, exactly. I find it really interesting. But moving on from the big, beautiful bill, what was the next topic we were getting into?
We were going to talk about a potential ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah, of course.
Benjamin Netanyahu's here in the US at the moment, visiting Washington. I think his third visit to the White House on
Yeah,
this,
but
and
I'm
how
not.
is progress?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that I even saw something, Piers Morgan, he did a post on his social media, and we all know Piers Morgan isn't the most progressive person to have ever walked the planet. But he did a post saying to Donald Trump, hey, look, this is horrific what's going on there. You have the power to stop this. I don't really understand why you're not stopping it. You know, obviously he still called it a war, as most media organizations call it, which I find fairly tiring when we can see fairly clearly that it's not a war. It's just a genocide at this point. But yeah, he said, let's end this, even Piers Morgan. So that really says something. But I've read a few worrying articles saying that people only believe ceasefires are being talked about because Netanyahu is in America right now and because he wanted to pacify Trump in some way by
Right.
discussing a ceasefire, and that it's not a real possibility, but that's simply been a result of him going to meet President Trump. So we'll see what happens following this over the next week and what actual, solutions or the like seem to follow from this. But yeah, so far the Israeli government has not agreed to any of the requirements that Hamas has asked for, among them being returning to the UN-sponsored food handouts and medical handouts and fuel support and etc., etc. So returning to that, withdrawing Israeli military from certain parts of Gaza, etc., etc. But Netanyahu's not agreed to that, and the IDF's not agreed to that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yes, it'll be interesting. And then they paused weapon support to Ukraine, and now they unpaused that. And supposedly there's some new tariffs on Russia because they're not playing ball. But again, that sort of rumbles on, that whole thing, without any resolution. And I think Netanyahu suggested today in the White House that Trump should get the Nobel Peace Prize. So clearly they need to solve Gaza if he has any chance of getting the Nobel
I
Peace
mean, I
Prize.
feel like it's kind of ironic that Netanyahu is asking for Trump to have a peace
Yes.
prize when Netanyahu is the one who's not agreeing to any standard of peace or ceasefire. Like, what do you expect Trump to do? You want him to force your hand? Do you want him to have that much of an impact that you aren't making the decisions anymore and that he's deciding on a ceasefire for you? Is that what you want? It's bizarre,
Yeah,
really, I have to say.
it will be interesting to see
Yeah.
what happens there.
Cool.
And then there was some terrible attacks on a synagogue last Friday night in Melbourne and somewhere else. And so, again, that's a nasty thing. Hopefully we thought that had sort of
Yeah,
ended
disgusting
and
thing.
finished and such, but still going on. And of course, it gets politicized again. The coalition says Albanese should be doing more. And the minister responds and says, the full force of the law. And they've, got increased security, etc.,
Yeah,
etc. So
definitely.
it sounds
I
the
mean, it
same thing that's been talked about before, right?
definitely. I think it's just tiring that they keep politicizing it constantly because obviously it's a horrific thing to be happening in any country, in Australia specifically. Like we don't want this to be happening to anyone. Why do we have to keep pushing it to like bipartisan positions? Why can't we support ending terrorist acts together as a whole country? I think that's quite depressing, really, to think about. And I know that Albo's put out statements saying that they're doing everything in their power to foil all these plans before they happen and that it's been very effective so far. But I guess there's only so much we hear about as the general public. We don't necessarily hear about other incidences that the police have foiled before they even occurred. So look, I'm sure that that's become a big stress point for them, and we'll see what happens with that.
Yep. And then finally, the results of the court case about the mushroom killing and the 3 votes of guilty, I believe, on 3 charges of guilty.
And we
Which for
thought we
me
had to talk about this because it's literally enraptured the entire
seemed
country
pretty
for
obvious.
months.
I mean, beef Wellington's never going to be served again on any dish, or if you ever go to anyone's house and you serve beef Wellington, you're going to be a bit scared, really. It's
Or
done
perhaps
terrible
it's going to go the other way and everyone's going to start serving it because they'll be
brand
interested in.
damage to that dish is awful.
Yeah, look, that's true, but I also think it's made it a bit infamous and at least increased people's awareness of what it even is as a dish. And we've talked about this often. I was even talking about this with some of my friends, that it's such a complicated thing to make. Maybe that's where the fascination came from with the whole case, but it's been interesting to see how that's developed and the nation has responded to it. And you know what I was thinking? I was thinking maybe it feels quite lighthearted compared to everything else that's happening in the world. It's still murder. It's still pretty horrific, but it's a case that feels like it could be out of a detective movie or a mystery movie rather than war crimes that we hear about every other day and the start of the war and nuclear apocalypse. So, it's a bit brighter than that, but that's the world we live in.
That's true. And let me conclude by something, just a little personal story. Today I went to Disneyland here for the first time in 50 years. I think I went there when I was 10 or 11 or something. Amazing, incredible experience. But just a few observations. Disney is still using plastic everywhere. I was kind of surprised that they're not more environmentally
Especially because
conscious.
they have the capacity to. I mean, obviously they're one of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah, I was rather just surprised by that. And, some of the Dodgem car type things still with gas cars and not electric cars. It was just surprising to me because it's such a wonderful experience and they do such a good job of welcoming people and giving people this incredible experience. It was surprising to me from a
But
brand point of view.
I would say as well, I don't know if I would find it that surprising just because it's like a pinnacle of capitalism itself, right? Disney isn't simply a cute little animation
No,
studio.
it's
It's
hugely
an
successful.
insanely massive multinational company that has bought out tons of its competitors and probably destroyed a lot of others behind the scenes. They're probably not the most ethical people on the planet. And even in terms of how they make their stories and how they've been really milking all of their stories and redoing them all in live action when it's so unnecessary just to make an extra buck. That's not art for the sake of art's sake anymore. That's art so they can, buy an extra car or an extra holiday home.
And the other funny moment today was we were just in a store and we got speaking to the lady, and I still can't believe this. She says, "Oh, when do you celebrate Christmas in Australia?"
So bizarre.
And I was so tempted to say, "Oh, we do it in June, on June 25th," but I couldn't bring myself to
Oh
that.
my
It was
God,
very,
that's
very funny.
ridiculous. No, you
So,
should have said that. What are these people on?
so it was a very funny moment for me.
But does she celebrate Christmas? Because if she celebrates Christmas and she calls herself a Christian, and she doesn't know the meaning of Christmas, therefore, or the reasoning behind it, because obviously it has to be held on the same day.
Same
It
day,
doesn't
yes,
just
you would think so.
switch.
Anyway, that was quite a fun
Oh
moment
my God.
today.
That's great. I think that's a good ending to our
That's a good
episode,
ending.
I
Because it's
would
quite
say.
fun to have a fun ending because we've been down and dour for some
Yeah,
time. So
exactly.
thank you all. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you tell your friends and follow us, and we'll see
And
you next
like and
week.
subscribe as always, and we love you all. Bye.
Thanks, Betty. Bye.